Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you, and I hope you're doing remarkably well. Don't forget to get that lovely hot cup of cocoa or tea or coffee, whatever it is that you drink, because I've got a fabulous story for you tonight. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Taylor and I'm from the Pacific Northwest region of the United States, from Bellingham in Whatcom County, which is a coastal city in Washington State, very near the Canadian border, and is also a port for ferries to Alaska. To the east of us is the statuesque imposing Mount Baker, which is a huge snow-capped volcano lined with ski runs, which is frequented by many tourists and locals alike. My wife Caitlin and I moved to the South Hill neighbourhood in Bellingham in 2003 when we bought a fixer-up house with the most fabulous sensational views over Bellingham Bay, with the added benefit of being close to downtown Bellingham, which meant I could get to my job in just a few minutes. We both moved to Bellingham as the South End schools there are reputed to be great for elementary up to senior school, as we were planning to start a family, so this seemed like the perfect quintessential place to live. My story begins in 2010, when my wife Caitlin and I had been trying for a baby for over 7 long years, without any effectual results, and we'd even had several tests to ensure that we were both fertile, and were assured by our paediatrician that we shouldn't have any problems conceiving a child. But 7 years on, we hadn't even been fruitful. Imagine my immense surprise when one morning I was doing my husbandry duties of taking out the trash, when I discovered my wife's birth control pills lying haphazardly at the bottom of the bin liner. I realised in a moment of total and utter astonishment that she had been surreptitiously taking these pills behind my back for all these years. No wonder she hadn't fallen pregnant. I began trembling with anger as I held the finished pack of pills in my hand, hardly daring to believe what I was seeing. I felt like I'd been run over by a bus or trampled to death by a massive stampede of bison. There is no worse or more wretched feeling in the entire world than knowing that the person that you have loved for so long has betrayed you in this insidious way. It's like everything you ever thought you knew has come tumbling down, and your whole world has collapsed before your very eyes like a wall of Lego bricks that comes crashing down in front of you. I was so incensed with rage. I felt as if my wife had duped, swindled and hoodwinked me minaciously, and it seemed like our entire relationship was based on one big fat lie. I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself down, and I entered the kitchen to see my wife smiling at me, and in that moment I wanted to scream, but I bit my lip and held my tongue, and how I did that I have no idea. "How would you like your eggs this morning, sweetheart?" she asked in a nonchalant way. In that moment, I wanted to throttle her so badly, I had to restrain myself. "What are these?" I said, throwing down the empty box of pills onto the kitchen table. The colour drained from my wife's face. "You found them?" she said. "Yes, I found them." "What is going on, Caitlin? Why are you taking birth control pills behind my back? Forgive me if I'm mistaken, but have we not been trying for a baby for over 7 long years?" "I'm so sorry," she said. "I didn't want to have children. I just didn't have the heart to tell you." "How long have you felt like this?" I asked, looking mortified. "Since before we got married, but I didn't tell you then because I just didn't want to lose you." "Do you realise how incredibly selfish you sound, Caitlin?" I shouted. "You knew I wanted kids. I made that very clear when we got married." Caitlin started choking up with tears. "I'm sorry," she cried. "I couldn't bear to lose you. I never told you how I felt. I was just hoping along the way that I'd change my mind." "Are you telling me that we had all those fertility tests for nothing, when all along you knew there was nothing wrong with us?" I said, throwing the pills again at Caitlin in my disgust. "How could you be so self-centred and heartless? How could you deceive me like this?"
It's all been a great lie. I thought we were supposed to love and trust each other."
"I'm so sorry," said Caitlin, sobbing. "I didn't mean to hurt you."
"You didn't mean to hurt me," I snapped. "You might as well have put a sledgehammer into my heart. And what grieves me the most is the betrayal and the lies, the incessant lies."
"You're not going to leave me?" asked Caitlin, crying. "I love you. Please don't leave me."
"Really?" I said, raising a cynical brow. "I'm not sure you know the meaning of love. I don't think you even know what love is."
"What are you doing?" asked Caitlin, as she watched me gathering my stuff together. "Please don't leave me. Please."
"Nobody is leaving anybody. Well, not yet anyway. I'm going away to think about all of this. I'll tell you my decision when I get back. I just need some space." So there I was out on the open road with my 4-wheel drive quad bike packed in the back of my car in the trailer, alongside all my camping gear. I was taking the 5-hour drive from Bellingham to the Wenatchee National Forest, where I intended to go exploring at Gallagher Lake on my ATV, and of course enjoy a spot of overnight camping. I had been desirous to do this trail for a long time now, and I was eager to create a big enough distance between Caitlin and myself so that I could finally clear my head. Once I parked my car in the parking bay and unloaded my ATV from the trailer using my ramp, I unpacked my camping gear from the boot of my car and tied my backpack down along with my other gear, including my lightweight canoe with bungee cords, to the back of my ATV. I was free at last, at long last. I felt like a cooped-up bird with clipped wings that had finally been released from its gilded gold cage, all but to fly again. In my heart I felt so empty and betrayed and broken up, after I had discovered Caitlin's insidious duplicity. I was not going to concern myself with all that now. No, not now. I was eager to become one with the natural world, like one of the ponderosa pine trees that stood upright, basking under the sun, around the silvery lake on a bright summer's day, concerning itself with nothing at all, but just being present in that moment. I had learnt from challenging times in my life before, when I'd lost my father to bowel cancer a few years earlier, that nature was indeed my biggest healer, and also my very best friend, for she had helped me to ground myself, to see things in a whole new light. Not only that, but she had an extraordinary capacity to heal my heart, which was exactly what I needed now. So there I was with my hands on my ATV, driving down some very tumultuous, turbulent terrain, and enjoying every single minute of it. There is something so magically uplifting and invigorating about a quad bike, and riding up those mountainous, rocky elevations, sometimes even bouncing on your seat while you maneuver your handlebars, really makes you feel on top of the entire world, and especially when you're surrounded by such exquisite scenery. I was riding down the Fortune Creek Trail towards Gallagher Lake, down these undulating dirt roads strewn with all kinds of rocks, surrounded by upper and lower embankments on either side. If you stopped the quad bike for a moment and looked briefly over your shoulders, you could enjoy resplendent views of the mountains rising up into the blue sky like masterful giants, with the tall silhouettes of the Douglas fir, spruce and logpole pine trees only serving to add depth and fullness to the picturesque beauty of this enchanting, magical place. I was riding up some very steep, treacherous inclines and through large puddles of water until finally I reached Gallagher Lake in the Teenaway area. I parked my ATV in an attractive clearing overlooking spectacular views of the lake itself, where I set up camp for the night and hitched up my tent. I decided to enjoy a spot of paddling on the harmonious lake in my small canoe, and it was so idyllic and restful, as there wasn't a solitary soul in sight, and the place was so tranquil, isolated and serene. Before long I sat around the mesmerising, crackling fire and boiled some hot water to enjoy a cup of hot, steaming coffee, while I watched the golden sunset in its dreamy, resplendent folds of tangerines, orange and pinks, splashing across the horizon in a kaleidoscope of pretty, bedazzling colours. I had purposely not charged my phone, and had left it in the front area of my ATV to alleviate the full temptation to use it. I instinctively knew that Caitlin would have left me hundreds of messages begging for forgiveness, and I couldn't stomach all that right now. It would seem like the very thought of her made me want to throw up violently, as I felt like a prize idiot for having been deceived by her for so long. While I was seeing divorce signs rising up in my head, I could already see my jovial plump pastor telling me, "Brian, you need to get a grip. You need to be a man about this. You must learn to forgive. What did you do to make your wife not share her issues with you?" Seeing my pastor's reasoning face in my head was making me as mad as hell. Stuff forgiveness, I thought. How could I ever forgive my wife when I felt such an incredible rage and hatred towards her? I really wanted no contact with her whatsoever, nor with the outside world. I just wanted to be one with nature. I didn't want any more thoughts of my wife to ruin or persecute the beauty of this magical night, and so I chose not to think about her at all. I sat there staring at the flames of the open fire, completely transfixed. It almost had a trance-like hypnotic effect over me while I cooked the burgers. The night was full of the sounds of croaking frogs and the chorus of crickets, and it was all so exceedingly pleasant. I glanced up at the sky and began to admire the Milky Way with the twinkling stars that sparkled like diamonds in the boundless firmament, along with the shimmering luminescence of the crescent moon. The immeasurable expanse that graced the sky only served to make me sentiently aware of how inconspicuous and small I actually was in the grand scheme of things, and how insignificant and irrelevant my problems really were. Did the Douglas fir tree really concern herself when one of her branches broke off, I pondered? Of course not. She just regenerated herself and grew more branches. Did the wild flower of the valley concern herself that the following morning she would bloom no more? Of course not. She was content just to be beautiful for a single day, and that was her lot. With those revelatory thoughts in my head, I eagerly retired to my sleeping bag and fell into a deep, restful, rather blissful sleep. But during the night I was unfortunately awoken because it became bitterly cold, possibly because I was camped out on a 6,000 elevation. And worse still, the howling wind didn't help matters either, as it restlessly whistled throughout the night, punneling my tent vigorously with an angry feistiness, almost as if it was mirroring or reflecting the turbulent state of my emotions. The very next morning I was awoken to a magnificent, beautiful day filled with pretty birdsong, and after a brief, refreshing paddle on the lake in my little canoe, and an invigorating hike to stretch my legs, I ate a brisk lunch of chicken stroganoff and rice, washed down with plenty of coffee, and then I got back onto my ATV with a gentle breeze blowing against my face. I felt so free and so alive on the precipitous, rough road, riding over steep, lumpy, mountainous elevations, with my ATV taking all the heavy beatings of this rugged, rocky landscape, as I proceeded upon my way to Van Epps Pass, as I wanted to get to the highest point with a 360-degree view of the surrounding mountainside. The howling wind suddenly started to pick up substantially, and all of a sudden, for a brief moment when I was going up the steep elevation, I felt something biting my cheek like a mosquito, and I slapped it away, releasing my grip off one of the handlebars for a fleeting second, but that's all it cost for me to lose control of my vehicle. I was violently flung off my quad bike down the rocky embankment, where I went rolling down the hill with my ATV rolling behind me. Everything happened so incredibly fast that there wasn't any time to react at all. All of a sudden my body ground to a halt, but before I could get out of the way, I felt the heavy weight of my ATV launching, thrusting and pounding itself upon me like a predator on the kill. The power of this machine pinned me down with a crushing force. The weight on my body was so immense, made all the heavier by the heavy camping gear I was carrying, which possibly meant that the combined weight of everything was easily over 800 pounds or even more. I could do nothing to lift the heavy weight off my body, and I knew I was well and truly trapped. I could only hope that someone would pass by on their ATV, so I could cry out for help, as I might not be seen from the road. The trouble was, since I'd ventured on this trail, I had encountered not a single person, as the area was unusually quiet, and now that was my greatest disadvantage. Supposing I was left out all night in freezing temperatures and howling wind, And then there were the wild animals to consider, like coyotes, wolves, or bobcats, who might see me as easy pickings. I didn't have a chance in hell of defending myself from such dreadful predators. I was at a loss as for what to do, as there was no way that I could lift myself or heave myself off the ground to push the bike off me. I didn't have the physical strength to do so, and there weren't any sticks in arm's length to assist me in any way, and even if there were, I doubt they would have helped. From what I could ascertain, nothing was broken, which in itself was a miracle, but that could change, of course, if the extreme pressure on my upper thigh continued, which might cause the bone to finally snap. Suddenly I could hear heavy feet rushing towards me, and the relief I felt was monumental. I cried out, "Help! Help! I'm over here!" I sensed someone was behind me, and they were breathing heavily like a horse, which made me think that the man coming to my aid was seriously overweight, unfit, and smoked a lot, hence the heavy breathing. Then I heard another pair of heavy feet that came rushing forwards, and they were standing behind me, but were doing nothing to help. I cried out again, "Help! Please, help!" Then I heard what I can only describe as some kind of squabble taking place, which sounded like two people arguing together in Chinese. It also sounded as if they were arguing over me. I could not turn around to see them. What the heck was going on, I wondered. "Help!" I cried. "Please help!" I could hear one of the people stomping off in the brush, and whoever they were, they sounded very aggrieved. The next thing I knew was that the heavy weight of the ATV was being lifted off me, and the relief I felt was immense. The pain immediately subsided. My body was rolled over on my back, and I saw this large, massive creature examining me, and I realised to my amazement that it was a Bigfoot, but this critter was a female Bigfoot. I was too shocked to be even afraid, and the critter seemed so concerned and was pressing up and down my leg with her large human-like hand that I noticed had tufts of hair up to the knuckles and flat, rather yellowish nails. She began to check my legs for injuries, and although I was bruised, nothing was broken, although my bones ached from all the bruising that I had sustained. The Bigfoot seemed satisfied that I wasn't seriously injured. She beckoned for me not to move and to stay put, and although no verbal words were articulated between us, I knew exactly what she was saying. I watched her dragging my ATV away with the back of her hands, with her palms facing upwards over the rocky embankment, through the trees to the top of the road, as if it was just a kid's toy in her overlong arms. I was transfixed by this display of superhuman strength. I mean, who can lift up a quad bike as if it's nothing? I stared at the critter in awe, as she was going out of her way to help me, and seemed so gentle and kind. I noted she was very human, with few ape-like influences, and when I say few, I mean few. I would say she was about 8 foot tall, 700 pounds, and 3 feet across the chest, and every part of her body was ripped with muscle and strength. I noted that she was covered with long flowing brown hair, and that her face was exceedingly human-like. While the female Bigfoot was placing my quad bike back on the road, I suddenly sensed something or someone was staring at me, and I felt very discomposed. And that was when I saw another Bigfoot in the undergrowth, and he was growling at me menacingly with his lips rolled back to expose his human-like teeth. He looked at me with deep-set, dark, malevolent eyes that were hostile and unfriendly. The critter was bigger than the female and exceedingly aggressive. He growled at me and sounded exactly like a lion, and that horrendous sound reverberated through my chest. I was terribly afraid. The critter was so terrifying and far more intimidating than the female because it was easily over 10 foot tall and 1,000 pounds. All of a sudden, the female Bigfoot was protectively at my side, and upon seeing the male, she began to shout at him in this fast chattering language. It was easy to see who wore the pants in this Bigfoot household, as he slunk away into the shadows, looking exceedingly sheepish, as if he'd been well and truly told off. The female Bigfoot picked me off the ground and tried to help me walk, but I hobbled precariously, so she picked me up in her overlong arms and threw me over her shoulders like a bag of potatoes, and carried me up the hilly embankment to the road beyond, and then gently placed me on my ATV, and waited to see if I could manoeuvre the vehicle all on my own. To my absolute amazement, everything was working fine, and I started up the engine and turned around to go back on my merry way. My only thought now was to get back home, and suddenly I was longing to see my wife, as my accident had brought everything into perspective. The kind female Bigfoot stood there watching me, and she nodded, and I waved my arm to her and shouted, "Thank you, thank you, thank you so much." I made the long journey back to the parking bay and returned to my car for the 5-hour car trek home to Bellingham, and I was eager to get back to my beloved Caitlin. I didn't care about anything now. I wanted to be with my wife more than anything in the world, and if she didn't want kids, then so be it. I knew in that moment I never wanted to be without her again, and irrespective of everything in the broad scheme of things, love was all that really mattered. As I drove home, I thought of my incredulous encounter with the charming female Bigfoot and how she'd saved my life. I had heard of Bigfoot over the years, but this critter was much more human than ape-like. I did not discern any cone-shaped head at all, and I did detect that she had a tiny neck that was covered in thick hair and was hard to see. When I arrived home, I ran into my wife's arm and we both sobbed and sobbed, holding each other for a long while. "Oh, I'm so glad you're back," she said. "I'm sorry," I said, "that you felt you couldn't confide in me, that you didn't want children. But it doesn't matter anymore, because as long as we're together, that's all that matters to me. All that I care about is you, Caitlin." "Are you sure?" asked Caitlin. "Of course I'm sure," I said. "But no more secrets between the two of us. Promise?" "Promise," she said. "What happened to change your mind about things?" she asked. "If I told you, you would never believe me. So I think I shall keep that secret all to myself," I said. "Fair enough," she said. Fast forward to 2011, and Caitlin told me that she had a present for me, and she handed me a pregnancy test that revealed that she was actually pregnant. "But I don't understand," I said. "I thought you didn't want children, and I was all right with that." "A girl is allowed to change her mind, isn't she?" she laughed. You'll be surprised to learn that Caitlin and I now have 4 children, 2 girls and 2 boys, and she believes that motherhood is the best gift that ever happened to her. So stranger things have happened. So there you are. That's my story. What an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.